On that, Michelle, Mark and Scott, to what extent are you using, or are you aware of your employees using social media, and to what extent do you think it's affecting your business, and also your relationship with with booksellers?
It's essential if you're an author to at least promote your book through social media. Ebooks and online marketing or promotion are a marriage. Essentially, you can't have one without the other, is my experience. And by that, I'll describe a model, an online model. I kind of reinvented the wheel, basically. After I spent many hours and months inventing it, I discovered that someone had already done it. But it essentially works this way. I aggregate books, or I publish books, or I aggregate and put it into the ebook retailers and libraries around the world. I then use social marketing, email, which we discussed in the previous session, which is very important. You then use these sources to drive traffic back to your website, where you offer information about your book and how to purchase that book. So that's basically the model, is directing traffic back to your website. So if you're an author and you don't have a website and you want to sell ebooks, I don't think you're going to sell very many, because I have so many authors that are under my books who really are a bit slow on the uptake of getting their own website. And it's just basic, and you can just use your name, essentially, unless you've got a very popular name. But you can do something that people, so that can at least Google it or Yahoo it, and then direct the traffic back to where your, for want of a better word, product is. And that's essentially the model. The other model, the tack-on end that I do differently from other retailers, is that from my website, the Dr. Z Publishing website, I offer places, about 30 retailers, that's probably a bit too many, but where a person can click on a link and be taken to where the book is for sale, for example, on Amazon or Kobo. Even Google, when you upload your book into Google, they offer you a preview so that a reader can actually read anywhere between 20 and 80% of your book. You can determine the percentage of pages that people can actually read. So that is the model that I use, directing traffic back to your website using social media and other forms of online processes to do that.
I have two things I want to say. One is that, of course, we use the sort of obvious channels for an obvious market. So something like the Cambridge Checkpoints study guides, which are study guides for students studying for VCE or HSC. Those are generally individual student purchases, and therefore we want to interact with that market. So we obviously have Facebook pages both promoting and interacting with students about those study guides. And the same thing for something like Cambridge Hot Maths, which is an online maths resource where students can get feedback or take part in quizzes and competitions. And then YouTube channels for certainly things like Hot Maths, which is entirely online, for both teachers and students to learn how to do something that maybe they haven't found intuitive, although hopefully it is. But then there's a second element to what we do, which is, and I think this is part of the evolution of the textbook, is that learning is a socially interactive thing to do. And whether you call it cheating when somebody leans over and looks at what's going on in somebody else's notebook, or whether you think it's a good idea at schools for kids to share ideas and to work on homework together, what we're seeing coming as part of the future of the textbook, if you like, is that social interaction built in, so that a student can transfer notes that they've written into their interactive textbook to other students and interact in that way. So they could be interacting in terms of sharing study notes, or in terms of doing homework together, or in terms of doing group work in class.
The social media element has brought the publisher much closer or more in contact with the reader than they have had before. And I think that's something that we've been concentrating a lot on. But at the same time, still working with our retailers and their connections in the community, and just broadening that range, I suppose.
How are you working with retailers?
In the same way we've always done, so new releases, new promotions, backlist promotions. And
Experimenting with prices, as Mark Tanner suggested, is a marketing tool.
And it's fascinating. We did a promotion over Christmas. It was with Amazon. It was the 12 days of Christmas promotion. We put an ebook in their £1.69 bin. We sold 830 copies of a book that we hadn't sold a copy of in a year. So it was remarkable, but then the returns on that are very small as well. So
yeah,
I'm just really starting to experiment with the pricing.
Yeah,
but it's something that we're going to look more and more at.
Caroline, what do you think publishers should be doing in terms of planning for the future? It's one of those really irritating future questions that come up in these things, but you can't really avoid them. Because most publishers that I speak to don't have anyone specifically looking after these issues. Because perhaps they don't value them enough. We don't pay anything for them, so we don't pay staff to look after them. What do you imagine is going to be a really key area for publishers to be looking at in the future?
Certainly, there had been a trend for publishers to perhaps overlook the value of the role of particularly of social media, since what we were talking about, and certainly there had been a precedent for that sort of work to be devolved out to a variety of people. Perhaps someone within a marketing division that was there was a kind of an extra burden placed upon them. But I think we've seen that change quite a lot and quite rapidly. People have recognised the value of having very focused and dedicated strategies to that kind of work. And I think that's a move absolutely in the right direction, and it only makes sense for the way that publishing is progressing. But I don't know, I have to say I think that probably the actual publishers here on the panel will be able to give you a much better sense of how they envisage their future, because, as I said, my work is with people who are very happy to experiment, because they really see, perhaps the most interesting thing is that they see the kind of dynamic opportunities of the technology and try to run as far and as fast with them as possible, and when they fall over, it's not so much of a problem for them. They don't have the same levels of investment, which means they can afford to take greater risks. So I think that smaller publishers have tried to move and accelerate quickly into these, with these new opportunities. But that doesn't necessarily give you sustained returns. And I think that's what people who are looking in the long term of the publishing industry want to see. We want to find a model that is sustainable and is sustainable across the board.
Just before we go to seek questions from the audience, I just want to ask, you three guys directly involved in publishing, because Michelle, we've had a conversation late last year about some major frustrations that were driving us bonkers in trying to get ebooks live in various different places. If you had a magic golden wand and you could change anything about digital publishing as it is currently operating today, what would that be?
Well, I've had a minor breakthrough by having an Onyx-based metadata feed. Basically, we send all our data to our retailers, and we were using Excel spreadsheets. And when the retailer uptakes that data, it ends up in all various configurations and gets terribly muddled at times. Onyx is an industry-wide standard that the data can't be confused. All the fields are appropriately labelled and they know how to use them. And it's been amazing, the change.
For me, it's which was touched on the previous panel, the ease of conversion at the moment. It is difficult, and it's difficult to get it exactly, perfectly correct, especially EPUB. Mobi Pocket seems to be a little bit easier. So it was touched on before. It used to be very difficult to create a PDF maybe 10 years ago. You almost had to subcontract that process out to an IT team somewhere in the UK or USA, whereas now you can just do it with the click of a button. EPUB isn't quite so easy, and I, in fact, subcontract the process out to India to do it. But maybe it will come a time, hopefully in the future, that the magic wand will be waved and you can just click the mouse and a nice EPUB where images don't float around the book comes about.
I think I'm going to need more than one magic wand.
It's a really big, powerful magic wand.
I think, and Scott has already spoken a little bit about this, but I think for me, what can't really come soon enough is a convergence of technologies. Because at the moment, there are so many different platforms, so many different ways of getting content onto those platforms. There's Flash versus HTML5. There are feuds going on between different software and technology companies that need resolving so that we can all get on with our lives. And so yes, my magic wand will be one easy way to get onto all the different platforms that are out there.
We might seek some questions from the audience now.
Are publishers going to ensure that, by having proofreading and editing after the conversion to make sure that the content is still, for ebooks, is still as high as a printed book?
There's two parts to that, to the answer to that. And the first one is there is EPUB and there is EPUB. There's not a consistent EPUB form out there. Like Kobo, for instance, will have an EPUB form that the Kobo reader will read, but you can't necessarily put that Kobo EPUB onto an iPad EPUB, and vice versa. And there are even more EPUBs out there. And as we heard before, there's EPUB 1, 2, 3 out there. So it may not necessarily be that the production team has grossly overlooked some typos and formatting and layout. It could simply be that you are reading an EPUB on a device that it wasn't designed for. So you have to get the right EPUB for the right device. And you can actually even check that on your PC or laptop. There's an Adobe Editions, there's a Nook for PC. If you read an EPUB on a Nook for PC or a Adobe Editions, it will look very different from one platform to the other. So that is one of the issues that EPUB has to confront in the future, is to have consistency through different reading processes. And the other part is, yes, well, if it is a blatant layout and production problem, then that's, slap on the wrist to your production team, because they should really look at it. I know I personally approve every title that is converted into an EPUB. I read it on I don't read every word. I check the layout on if it's meant for an iPad, or if it's meant for an Adobe Editions, I check it on Adobe Editions or a Nook. I'm just looking for layout, really, to make sure the images, as I said before, aren't floating all around the place. But sometimes that's why publishers love PDFs, because it's fixed, and you're not going to get as many issues as you are with an EPUB. But the nice thing about EPUB 3 is that you can get what's called a fixed EPUB, and your images and your text remain very well aligned as the publisher has intended it to be.